is Patricia Ann O'Gorman O'Mara, and she was very beautiful and without makeup. And she had black curly hair and taller than I am and really smart. And Mother was a laugher. And when people say, well, how do you remember your mother? I always remember Mother laughing. And later in life, she and Daddy had a serious, very serious problem with alcohol. And even then, she was a laugher. So Daddy went to the Second World War. I think he was gone for a couple of years. I was little and I really don't remember. And then after the war, Daddy came back for a couple of months, and then he went to Japan. And so we went to Japan. We took, and you know, in those days, 1947, nobody went anywhere. And Mother we got on a train in Buffalo, and we took the train. We had a sleeper car and stuff. I don't remember bathroom things. And we took the train to Seattle, all bothered with these three naughty children, and I remember crawling through the cars, and we were very bad children. And I was not a kid. I was 12, I guess. Anyhow, so we got to Seattle, and we got an oil tanker. So we took this oil tanker from Seattle to Yokohama. I have no idea how long it took, and I'm sure it was quite a long time. We ate in the mess hall. It smelled just like kerosene or whatever that is that they propelled these ships with in those days. And so we were in Japan for 2 years, which was wonderful, 2.5 years. We went everywhere. We got on the trains, and Mother took us everywhere. All the islands and anything that wasn't bombed out, including Tokyo, which was. And we came home on a very nice ship, and then started a normal life in the United States. But when you're young and you go to Japan and you come back a teenager and all that kind of stuff, that's the significant part of, it's not a long time, but it's a very different time, so you remember it. And then we moved to Boston. Daddy got a job in Boston. And then we moved, and then you end up in grade school and high school and junior high and all that, and that's a blur because it was just life. And then Charlie showed up. Happy days were here again.
My parents were extremely quiet. I never heard music played in the house in my life. My father was mainly a presence that was reading in the evening. I mean, this was a long time ago, so that's what they did, sat around in the evening and read. We played cards. We had big family card games with aunts and uncles and playing poker. That was fun. But it was a quiet growing up, and we lived right across from All Saints School, where my sisters and I all went, which is not very good because you could go outside. When you went out on your porch in the morning, the convent was right across the street. The nuns would go like that, call you if they needed an errand run or something. I went to the Naval Academy because my sister Ann's husband, Earl, was a naval officer. He'd gone to the Naval Academy and was captain of a ship during the Second World War, and he was very influential. He's one of the men in my life, growing up. And I've always thought that he probably thought I was growing up living at home at Loyola College, with not a very exciting future. And I think he suggested that I try and get an appointment to the Naval Academy, which I did, and I took a competitive exam in Baltimore, and was accepted.
So we lived in Annapolis, and we lived in military housing for a while. Then we moved into a big old-time historic home in Annapolis, the Weems House. At the Naval Academy, there was a guy named John Gainey, and his family was from Buffalo, and Mother, of course, was from Buffalo. So Mrs. Gainey called my mother and said, "My dear John is at the Naval Academy," and so Mother had John Gainey come over.
John Gainey was a friend. He was like a roommate, and John was a lot of fun, and he asked me one Saturday let's go out into town, I know these people, the O'Maras. And I went out with them,
And they drank, which you're not supposed to do, and ate, and we had this big lovely kitchen, old-timey kitchen with a huge table. And one day I was upstairs looking over the stairs overlooked, the staircase overlooked the front hall. And Charlie was there, and he had a brown suit. Now, I don't know why I remember. Do you remember the brown suit? Had on a brown suit. Yes, you did. He's looking at me funny. No, he had on a brown suit. And so anyhow, which I guess I noted because it was unusual.
How old were the two of you at this time?
I was probably about 17 and you were 5 years older. He's always a lot older. And the guys they were just nice young men at school, and they had no place to go. And my mother was lovely and gracious, and Daddy was calm. And
Tom's mother was extremely welcoming, and we feel just totally at home, you know. We all went into the kitchen with this giant table, and everybody sat around, and as I said, you could have a beer if you wanted. I don't think we ever had more than 2 beers in a day, so that wasn't a big part of it. It was just a place to be away, you know. Everybody thought Molly was out of bounds because she had a boyfriend, you know.
Then near graduation or at graduation, I broke up with Jack, and Charlie broke up with Ruth. And so then we went to a few of the parties and stuff at graduation week, and I went to the ring dance with John Gainey, because his girlfriend Phyllis was in Buffalo.
End of graduation, there were a number of big events, and the Naval Academy made a big thing about getting your ring and formal parties and balls and this type of thing. And I remember I had a date with Denny for one of those, and John Gady had a date with Molly. And after that, we switched for the next night, and I went out with Molly, and that was it from then on. But John, the ring dance was a thing where you step into a giant ring. That's when you got your Naval Academy ring. So you step into that. It seems so corny now, but you step in and embrace, you know, and you kiss your girlfriend, and she gives you the ring. And all that. And I remember Molly wouldn't kiss John Gainey.
Well, he was engaged to Phyllis.
He still talks about it.
I know.
If you talk to John Gainey today, he would say, "Remember the time Molly wouldn't kiss me at the ring dance?"
And I have to say, but you were engaged to Phyllis.
He never got over it, literally. And so that's.
But
I never dated Denny, but we went one-to-one thing and one dance.
Yes, but you see, what you perhaps don't know or don't remember well is that I said to Denny, "This one is mine." And I did. She would tell you, and that you could stay away from this one. So there we have it. Hello.
So our really first dates, first going together and all, was when I was graduating, which seems unfortunate. I was there for 4 years, and the first time we dated and became a couple at all was after graduation.
And then after graduation, Charlie went to sea and came back, and then I don't know, we just evolved being together, and then we got engaged and were married a year later in May at the Naval Academy at the chapel. And then Charlie went to sea. We went to Norfolk. We rented an apartment, and Charlie went to sea. And I gave up the apartment, and I drove up to Mother and Daddy's house. They were in New York at the time, Hastings on the Hudson. And I was pregnant with Michael. And then Charlie came back from sea, and Michael was born. And then we got another apartment in Portsmouth, where the ship was being fixed. Michael was a baby, and we went to submarine school. And we had $25 in the bank, and for Christmas we bought Michael a teddy bear. Then when I was 8 months pregnant with Kevin, we drove to Key West from New London, Connecticut. In those days, when of course there were no highways, 95 was Roosevelt, was Eisenhower's dream. But Kevin was born in Key West, and Charlie was home, which was really nice. And then and then I came home from the hospital, and a hurricane was coming, so the ships went to sea. They went to Hurricane Anchorage in the middle of the night. So there I was with Kevin, who was about 4 days old, and Michael, who was 17 months, and the hurricane. But the hurricane did not inundate us. And as they say, don't worry, it'll be broken up on the coral. So after Key West, which was very nice and very, very Key Westy in those days, nobody but us and the natives, we went to Charleston, South Carolina, had a very nice apartment downtown, and Charlie went to sea, and I was pregnant with Patrick, the cameraman. And we were there a year. We moved to Boston in 1960 because Charlie was going to MIT for 3 years and changed his designator, which would mean he wouldn't have to go to sea anymore, because we had this plethora of boys, including the boy who was coming, whom we didn't know was a boy, but suspected. So we got to Boston, and
But what I wanted to add to that, and maybe everybody doesn't think it's interesting, but I do, we arrived in the car with Molly, 9 months pregnant, again, and she was so swollen that she couldn't see. The only thing you could see were tips of eyelashes and these swollen lids, and she was all swollen. So we went right to the Chelsea Naval Hospital. And the stupid corpsman said, you know, what's the problem? I see she's pregnant. You know, I said, she doesn't always look like this. So, anyway, I forget what they gave her. I started school, very intensive summer program at MIT, so I had to go right away to school. And I sort of forget how,
well,
I remember going in and scrolling on the blackboard that Patrick was born.
yes.
Only a couple weeks after we got there, and so just, MIT for me was very hard. You know, studied in the basement, cold basement, in an overcoat, with all the noise going around upstairs. And then we had a fourth child,
Yes, we did.
Charlie,
Little Charlie.
while we were there.
But graduate school was very hard.
Okay.
And all the guys, they were all naval officers, and they all had to take the same classes, except they could drop statistics, which they did. And
That was the first time I took tranquilizers.
yes, right.
I remember as I passed out in class, collapsed on the desk. They took me to the doctor. Anyway, that was a hard time.
It was difficult, but it was a happy time. We were in Boston with my brother Kevin and his wonderful wife Sheila, and Denny, and Big Mike. Big Mike was at Harvard, and Kevin was at Harvard, and so it was nice that we were all together. And Denny, I'll tell you one funny story. Denny had Mikey the actor, John Michael Higgin the actor, while we were there. And she dropped off the other three. Yes, Michelle and Renee, named after me, and Patrick Higgin. And she dropped them off. And there were the four of you. And I was so envious that she was going to go and get into a bed of iron sheets, and people were going to feed her, and they were going to bring her food. And after I realized that, I thought, oh boy, are you in bad shape. There are these 7 little blonde people lurking about everywhere. And we left. We went to Charleston, South Carolina, and Daddy worked in the
Shipyard.
in the shipyard. I don't know what he was doing, but then, because then we had little Charlie, and I was 30, and people thought I was the oldest mother they ever heard of. When Dad told the three of you on the school bus corner that it was another boy, Michael says we danced around like savages because it wasn't a girl. Beasts, they're beasts. But anyhow, Sean was a wonderful baby. He was difficult when he was 2, but he was a wonderful baby and recovered from difficulty and was never bad again.
The amazing thing is life sort of didn't stop when we,
Oh, no,
You know,
oh,
I mean,
no.
I went on,
Went to school.
you had the baby and I went back to the shipyard and went to work, you know.
Yeah. Put the baby on your hip and off you go. And it was right in the middle of the civil rights activities of trying to register voters and all this stuff. And we met and we were in, at that time we were Catholics, and we hadn't seen the light. And there were, in the church, there was a local guy named Father Coughlin, and his family owned a jewelry store in town, and so he started up a civil rights group, an interracial group. Well, it was us and a couple other military people.
I think the rest of them were all black.
I guess it was us, him, and another priest, and then black people. And so we would meet, and one of the main things you had to do, which for them was down in South Carolina was a big deal, you had to eat together. So we would have dinner at very odd times, or like 4 in the afternoon, and they would drink bourbon and milk, which Charlie didn't.
Well, that was after mass.
Yeah, and Charlie didn't drink, and I'd never heard of it, and it looked nasty.
One of the more interesting things we did in that group, some of the African American people were saying that the priest had actually offered to pay them money if they would not go to his church and go across town.
Wow.
So on a Sunday, we met in advance, and Charlie was really evil and had this white hair. You know, he was the whitest thing you've ever seen standing up. So we gave him to John Brown, who
It was
was
brown.
very proud. So he walked down the aisle holding Charlie, and we all walked in together.
We were loved by all.
I actually went with this priest who was very charismatic. He looked like an apostle. Somebody who wanted to follow me. He and I went to a Woolworth to try and convince the store manager to hire more black people.
Wow.
So we did a few things like that.
Yeah.
And,
Well, there's a Job Corps, and I used to go with the black ladies to interview people who would work in this Job Corps thing.
I went to a great thing in the evening once. There's another very charismatic black guy who was purple, called Esau Jenkins. You can look him up on the internet. He's still famous, but we were there. But I could remember we got in a giant circle, standing like this, and I had 2 African American ladies on either side who were big and plump. I remember because our hands were so plump, and we're all saying,
We shall.
"We shall overcome." I mean, at the time, I realized that this is a real experience. It's a very unusual thing to be doing. But
It was so funny. It was
remember-
wonderful. They thought it was funny too. There's this big tall guy.
while I was president of Navy Wives at a young age, you know, she was what, 30 or something, in Charleston, so she was occasionally on television. And
Oh yeah.
we won once Ralph Abernathy, who was a contemporary of Martin Luther King, who was coming to the
Charlottesville.
Charlottesville.
No. Charleston. South
Charleston,
Carolina.
yeah, Charleston
Sorry.
Black Church. So we of course went and typically went up and sat in the front, and the local news picked it up, and of course picking up the only 2 white people sitting probably in the front. So when we got home, we were sitting in the family room, and our neighbor named Pat Buttles, she came over and burst in the door and said, Molly, I saw you on TV again. Well, what were you doing in there with all those N people?" She, this shows how people didn't get it. You know, you're on TV, but what were you doing with those? She didn't.
She just didn't understand. It never
Yeah.
occurred to her. What were you doing there? It was really funny. it was one of her children and some of his buddies who smeared ketchup on our house, and they also put a sign on the house, on the front yard saying that we were white and N-word, and we had to go and remove the site. And so there were some incidents like that, but you were not in danger. I mean, there were no guns or any of those terrible things like we could have had. And we were there for a year after Sean was born. Then we moved up to Washington, and Big Mike and Denny lived 2 blocks. So those 9 cousins, she had 4. The 9 cousins got to know each other really well, and I would think our photographer here could tell you stories of what the 9 cousins did and didn't do. And we did a lots together, picnicking and what have you, and Kevin and Sheila would come down. And, we went to California, and we took a month to drive. It was a lovely month. It's one of the, we went on non-big roads, and we stayed in cabins, and we stayed in a place where we stayed about 4 or 5 days, and the kids, there was a pool, and there were statues of dinosaurs and all sorts of odd stuff. And the kids could tell you, but I made them hug trees and would stop, and I would pick things along the way. And there were no seat belts. So these people were wandering around this gigantic black car we had.
I bought a big Chrysler, used Chrysler Town and Country with three seats. The rear seat was facing towards the rear, and it was really good. I built a box.
They didn't have
probably
plastic things in them.
6 or 7 feet long, fit on top of the car, and we bought duffel bags. We bought 8 duffel bags.
Matching.
So everybody had their own duffel bag full of clothes, and there was another duffel bag with extra things, linens and stuff like that. And when we stopped at night, you could open up the side of that box and withdraw these things like bullets out of a gun. And it was really good. It was very casual but fun.
Oh, yeah. And we had breakfast in the room, some cabin or wherever we were. And then we had lunch on the side of the road somewhere. And then we ate in some sort of a restaurant. And we would bring all these people, with all these blonde people lurching and whatever. And we would say, we need 7. And in those days, they looked at you blankly and they said, you need 7? And we went to all sorts of funny places. And I think we went to an alligator park.
Yeah.
And I mean, all these funny things that the kids want to do. And then we went, as they say, we went to Badlands, and we found
Mount Rushmore.
We went to Mount Rushmore, Crater Lake. We stayed at Crater Lake. We had no heat. We had no water, because we didn't stay in the lodge with 7 people. We stayed in these unheated cabins, which I'm sure have been condemned. So that was a fun month, and I think the children remember it fondly, as do we. Yeah, there's no magic about being married. Often people say, oh, 64 years come this May, to the same man. And I always say, I don't think you get to add up marriages, but anyhow, there's really no magic. You have to be fortunate enough to love each other, okay. But then as you mature and change, because when you're 30 or when you're 20, you're really unfinished, to say the very least. And you have to be able to be on the same track. And if you're going along, you're not one person, you're 2 people, you got 2 tracks. And you're going along, and the civil rights stuff come up, and we both do it. Which would not have been Daddy's, or Charlie's, original thing, because he was a Southerner. That's one of the things my mother said, you're gonna marry Charlie, he's really nice, but he's a Southerner, And so, anyway,
Baltimore.
she actually did say that, but Buffalo's a long way from Baltimore. If you don't stay on similar tracks, not the same track, no, you can't be on the same track, you're on similar tracks, and you still love the person because the person hasn't become a swine, and and you're patient, and you give, and you take, and you are equal, and all of that kind of talk. There's no magic in all this. It's just, and it's not luck. People say, "Oh, you're so lucky with your boys." I think, yeah, well, let me tell you about luck. And I said, it's not luck. It's everybody had a job. They were students. I was the mother. He was the breadwinner. And then they were, were nice working men, and you did what was right. And it's.
What I would add to that, though, is also having children so quickly and having a big family. You know, you're trying to keep your head above water part of the time with a big family, and it's fun, but there's so many obligations, but it's very bonding. And by the time Sean was born, 10 years had gone by, and
Who remembered?
there would be no thought of going off with somebody else.
Oh,
you know.
no.
But there's an element, I guess, of you're particularly loyal and nice and a sense of right and wrong and obligation, and you still do,
Yeah,
And,
somewhat, yeah. We lived on Navy money, which means we had no money. We had a lot of class, and we had a lot of gold braid, but we didn't have any money. And when everybody finished school, we saved Charlie's Navy retirement money, so we had enough money for when we're old, like now. And we still lived in our house in Reston. Winnie had twice as much money as when we moved into it, because Charlie stayed in the Navy for 20 years, we have health care. So none of this is catch as catch can. It's a thought through thing, and you just can't go along willy-nilly. You have to have some thought in what you do. And Charlie's easy to live with. I mean, really. I mean, give me a break.
You hear that?
He's a very easy person. I am not an easy person to live with, but that's the way the mob flops. But he's an easy person to live with.
You're a fun person, boy.
Oh, yeah. And anyhow,
Interesting.
it's been a lovely life. Thank you very much, Patrick. And then Charlie showed up. Happy days were here again.
You're incredibly good at that.
Oh,
It's
am I?
unbelievable. Yeah. So, tell me about.
Would this be a better time, like, for us to?
No, I suspect. You know what might be? Would it be more interesting to ask you individually about how you met? Would the stories be different?
No, because I can't narrate it like that. Doesn't.
Well, nobody can narrate it quite like that. That was, yeah. That
Well,
was
I can
really,
tell
you did it really
I can
well.
tell you what happened.
Would you rather? Maybe you want to sit there too then for this part, or how would you like to handle it?
Well, I don't know, but I mean, the thing is, I remember the first time I saw Charlie.
Okay, well, maybe we should just start, and then maybe you can
The
Chime
stars
in
came
and-
out, and there were explosions.
And what?
let's hear what you have to say, and then Dad will probably be like, that's not the way it happened. And then you'll have to get in there and, okay. Okay, we're recording. So how did you meet your future husband?